So welcome, everyone. We are so grateful that all of you have joined us today. I am Mayor Cromwell. I'm the founder and director of the nonprofit called the Great Mother Love Way. The purpose of the Great Mother Love Way is to help humanity wake up to the truth that we are part of a sentient, sacred earth. And Mother Gaia yearns for us to remember her and that her love for us is tremendous. She's calling for us to come home to her and all the sacred seen and unseen ones to heal into our true place on the planet. And I'm very honored today to be interviewing Michael Meade. A little bit about Michael. He is a renowned storyteller, author, and scholar of mythology, anthropology, and psychology. He combines hypnotic storytelling, street-savvy perceptiveness, and spellbinding interpretations of ancient myths with a deep knowledge of cross-cultural rituals. He has an unusual ability to distill and synthesize these disciplines, tapping into ancestral sources of wisdom and connecting them to the stories we are living today. Michael is also the author of numerous books, which include Awakening the Soul, The Genius Myth, Fate and Destiny, The Two Agreements of the Soul, Why the World Doesn't End, The Water of Life, Initiation and the Tempering of the Soul. And he's the editor with James Hillman and Robert Bly of Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart. And he's also the creator of the Living Myth podcast. In addition, Michael is the founder of the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, a nonprofit network of artists, activists, and community builders that encourages greater understanding between diverse peoples. So this particular event today, this interview, is actually a lead-up event to the 1,000 Goddesses Gathering Global Grid, a unified field of divine feminine ceremonies taking place around the world on October 21st. And all of you are welcome to join us. And if you are not of the feminine gender, I don't want it to sound too gender-oriented there, then please let your goddess women friends know. Every woman is a goddess. And the masculine is definitely invited to support us in our ceremonies around the world. I also want to share that we are very grateful for your registration and joining us today, as they are supporting the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation founded by Michael, along with the Great Mother Love Way, which is the organizer of the 1,000 Goddesses Gathering Global Grid. So a few housekeeping pieces. You are all muted. And so if you have a question, there will be time for Q&A at the end. So please save your question to the end. And I will let you know at that point how you can let us know that you have a question for Michael. And this is being recorded, and everyone who's registered will receive the replay link in the next day and a half. All right, so welcome, Michael. I am so thrilled to be talking with you here today. And I want to start off with this large question of how do you define divine feminine? What does this mean to you with all of your mythological background?
Good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. Well, there's lots of ways to imagine it. In the moment, I'm imagining the goddess as creator. So in Western world, modern tradition, you tend to see a masculine creator, a god, father, but many of the ancient traditions had the world created by a feminine deity. I'm thinking of Sophia, Gaia. Well, Gaia in Greek mythology came right after chaos in some of the stories. And so part of what's lost in the modern world is the presence of the feminine as divine, which then affects the presence of feminine in human form. And so one of the things missing, and one of the things perhaps intended to be found as we move from the world that we used to know, which is already gone, towards a world that we haven't completely envisioned yet, would be the return of the feminine. And that means a return of the divine feminine, a return of the archetypal feminine. And so I think of it as a missing piece. and then since if you take Gaia, or Sophia in her own way, the divine feminine was often imagined as the womb, and the cosmos was imagined as a series of nesting wombs, so that you go from the human womb to the womb of the earth to the womb of the world to the womb of the cosmos. And so when humans lost the sense of the presence of the divine feminine, in a sense, the womb was lost. And so then the womb becomes the understanding of a depth of welcoming, a depth of interconnectedness, and in a sense of protection. And so it's strange in a way, the modern world, which is alienated from nature and the earth because of the loss of feminine partially, or maybe even majorly, we're proceeding to destroy the atmosphere that protects the womb of the earth. And so in a way, the alienation that exists in the psyche, the modern psyche, which is a alienation from the womb, from the feminine as source of vitality, protection, wisdom. Sophia meant wisdom. All of the alienation from that is acted out and played out in the way that modern cultures are destroying the earth. And so in mythology, the story always goes on. I think you mentioned I wrote a book called Why the World Doesn't End. And if you're thinking in terms of divine energies, the divine feminine doesn't end. So another way to look at the divine feminine is womb and tomb. So that it's the womb from which life comes, and it's the tomb to which all life goes before it starts over again. And so when people think the world is going to end, that's another evidence of the loss of the sense of the presence of the divine. Because as womb and tomb, the feminine is symbolic of the very mystery of life, which is birth, death, renewal. That we're living and always have been living in this mystery, often was seen as the feminine mystery of life, death, and renewal. We can see it in nature where a forest grows and then it dies back and falls down, and a forest grows back from what has fallen down. And people used to read the text of nature as a way of understanding human nature. And so when we don't feel held by the womb of life, we're less likely to live in a way that allows us to keep growing, because the womb is a continuous source of vitality, imagination, inspiration. And so a tremendous amount is lost when the divine feminine is lost. And that eventually filters down to a lack of imagination, respect, and care for the earth, and a lack of imagination, respect, and care for the feminine, particularly in women, but also the feminine in men is another place where there's a sense of loss and alienation.
So thank you for that. That's very profound. The love of the mother, the love from the mother. What are your thoughts on that? The great mother, the divine feminine.
Well, I'm intrigued with the idea of a mother complex. So everyone has a mother complex. And the nature of a complex is that it's complicated. And that means you never get rid of your mother complex. And then also, psychologically speaking, when we grow up after we're no longer a child, infant and child, where we're just absorbing everything, we can move away from mother or the parents, but then we carry it inside as the introjected mother or parents. So everyone's initial mother experience becomes their internal mother complex. And even though we leave home and often distance from maybe mother, we carry her with us. So That's the psychological picture of the complex. And again, the modern world is a reduced world. It lacks the what I call vertical imagination, which is needed to reconnect to divine entities and so on. So it used to be, perhaps in mythological cultures, better understood that you have the personal mother who, when she's pregnant, is impregnated with the divine force of creation and birth giving. But then she's held in this greater womb of the imagination of the divine feminine. And so one of the things missing in modern culture, which makes everything harder to understand and more difficult to learn, is a meaningful rite of passage. And I'm saying that because the idea of ancient people understood all around the world was a person is born more than once. And so the first birth, we are born from the womb of our actual mother, which inside the mother was imagined as the great sea from which all of creation came. So we've lost that due to scientific point of view. But after being initially born from the mother's womb, we're very dependent, the most dependent of all mammal species. And then when we get to be adolescent, bordering on youth, we're supposed to be born again. That second birth would be a psychological, mythological birth in which each person, girl or boy, would have an experience that cracks them open from the limited experience of childhood and psychological dependency to the fact that each person is secretly connected to the womb of the earth, which is connected to the womb of the world, which is connected to the womb of the cosmos. And so in traditional cultures, when they were healthy, a person would be born again and understand that the human nature is connected to great nature, and the human psyche is connected to the womb of the divine. And so people would have not just an awakening to a greater sense of psychological self, which is really important and would happen, but also a connection to the divine, the sacred, beyond the psychological, which would give a person a sense of being held in the womb of the cosmos, which makes it more possible to have a centered quality in one's own life. Because even if your mother didn't hold you, you then get moved from the lap of the mother to the lap of the great mother. And that was one of the main functions of a rite of passage for girls and for boys. And so what happens in the modern world is the feminine has collapsed from the divine all the way down to the personal. And so a part of our modern mother complex is all the things we didn't get from our mother, who really isn't who we were supposed to get it all from. The mother was only partially, and she was being held in a greater thing. And then the mothers in modern world didn't get their rite of passage, so they don't even know that they're being held by a mother that they no longer recognize, and so on and so forth. So when we lose that connection, so I like to think
for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
But just the idea of the complexity of it all, and the idea that, so when I think of mothers, like when I think of my mother, who didn't have a mother, my story to myself is I was mothered by unmothering, because my mother didn't have a mother, and so she didn't have her own experience of being mothered in a personal way. And so that became harder for her to be a mother, even though she had a lot of children. But that can't be the whole story, because then I'm just laying something on her. But she was actually part of a cultural experience that lacked a genuine sense of connection to the mother, the great mother. And so we're in a condition of loss with regard to the great mother and with regard to the feminine in general. That's part of our complex.
Yeah, boy. So, this is, I'm going to jump around here, so please forgive me. I know the little bit I know about your foundation. You actually work with young people. You work with different groups that, I don't know if you call them disenfranchised, and you, I'm certain that you probably lead or coordinate some of these rituals for them.
Yeah, I've done a lot of ritual work with indigenous people and tribal people and with contemporary people, usually with at-risk groups and at-risk populations, and often in at-risk places.
Mm, thank you. Thank you for that really needed and powerful work. You know, you're making me think about the term mother wound. Um, that it's a rare individual who doesn't have some level of mother wound. I have a friend who does a lot of divine feminine healing work with women, and one of the areas that she focuses on is the mother wound. So thank you for speaking to that. So I know you've addressed this a little bit, but is there anything else you want to share about the role of the divine feminine on Earth at this time, and what your thoughts on observing what is happening with a lot of women's groups?
Well, we're all in this sense of a collective mother wound, a collective wound that causes an alienation, because the divine mother, the mother as creator, is specifically often is a weaving figure, a weaving deity. And so the creation myths around the feminine often have to do with the weaving of the world. And the weaving, one of the understandings of the weaving is that everybody's connected through the web of life. And so long before the World Wide Web, you could say there was the womb wide web, which meant that everyone was interconnected with the web of life, which is way more complicated and interesting than the World Wide Web, which tends to be horizontal. And the web of life is vertical as well as horizontal. And so, well, I guess I'm thinking of this story. So I was working with a number of African people from West Africa, and we were doing events in the United States. And part of the group were women, tribal women, and they were working with American women. And one of the things they would come back and talk about was how it took them a while to understand, why do the contemporary women in Western world feel disoriented or separated from, they called it separated from the earth. And so we would talk about that at night. And one of the things that they wound up explaining to me, because they had all been initiated in their tribal fashion, and for the women, the initiation meant having your womb connected to the womb of the earth. So their explanation of themselves was that we may be poor and we may be too dark in appearance for many people, and we may be dismissible in some ways, but we can never disrespect ourselves. We can never be made small. We can never be diminished at the level of the soul, because our wombs are connected to the womb of the earth. That's the way they would talk. And it was just amazing. It was powerful, and it was clearly an embodied sense of being in an embodied connection to the womb of the earth. They had that, and their sense was, and I'm just saying what they told me, their sense was that many modern women don't feel connected at the womb level to the earth, which in terms of Gaia and other mythology is the mother of everyone. And so if we're thinking of what comes next in the world, I'm saying that we're betwixt and between, that we're living now betwixt and between the world that we knew, that's already gone, and the world that we don't know yet, that is kind of coming in mythological terms. Then one of the things that would change would be a re-wombing of the world, a reconnecting of everyone's womb to the womb of the earth, which would give us the understanding of why we have to protect the earth, but also would give us the sense of being real earthlings. And I'm including the men and the women, because in my experience working with men and women, men have a womb, but it's in the heart. And so when we say that we've lost the connection to the divine feminine, there's something missing of a connection from the heart of men often to the womb of life. And so if we're imagining a better world, those are some things that we could imagine would be part of it. And mythologically, it's all available. It's all in the stories. It's all written inside the human psyche. It's all trying to return anyway. So there's a thought.
You know, well, you are really striking some strong chords. I mean, this is a large part of my work, actually, is connecting people back to the heart of Mother Gaia. But I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you have any suggestions, and kind of putting you on the spot here because we didn't talk about this in advance, but to reconnect with our wombs to the womb of the earth, and for men from their hearts to the womb of the earth. I'm just curious what suggestions you may have for that.
Well, I'll just tell you what comes to mind, because we had mentioned ritual, so one of my current ideas is that we are in the middle of a rite of passage, a collective rite of passage, because a traditional rite of passage begins with a separation. If you think of young people in a rite of passage, the young person is separated from their family. And as I said, they're intended to go from the lap of their mother to the lap of great mother. They're intended to go from the womb of the family to the womb of nature. And so in order to do that, you have to have a separation. And eventually you have a return, and the person returns as a different person. That's what makes it a rite of passage. But in the middle, between the separation and the return, there is this middle area where creation occurs. The middle ground is the rich ground, and it's often called the liminal space. Liminal means betwixt and between. Technically, a limen is the base of a threshold that you step over when you're going from one place to another. So we're in that liminal space between what used to be and what's trying to be, between what we lost and what we're trying to find. And a lot of it can be imagined as these deep womb connections. So if you accept that we're in that space, and if you accept that people used to imagine that we were in that space, and that a person got born again through this liminal space where they become a more of a full person, a person born into a knowledge of themselves and how they're connected to the world, that would be done through rituals. And so one of the rituals that I studied and learned from people in West Africa that I've used, talking about young people in the States here, where I am, is to actually be buried in the earth. So in West Africa, the earth is considered to be the center of everything. And the nature of the earth, connected to the divine feminine, because they ascribe the earth to the feminine deity. The nature of it is welcoming, generosity, holding, protecting, nurturing, inspiring. And so sometimes you would be buried in the earth in order to connect to the earth. And the burial is done at an angle, like a 45-degree angle, so that your head is above the earth, everything else, your whole body's encased in the earth, and you can't move. But you're not laying flat like dead, and you're not completely standing up. You're at this angle, almost like you're in a spaceship, and that's what it kind of feels like. Because when we're walking around on the surface of the earth, because of gravity, the earth feels solid and stable, and we feel stable with it. But the earth is actually flying through the universe at whatever thousands of miles per second. And when you're buried in the earth, you feel like you are flying. It's an amazing experience. And so the way they would do it is the person would be buried in the earth and stay there for 24 hours through a night. Someone would stay with them at a distance that was there for protection, but you weren't supposed to speak to anyone. You were supposed to be in a meditative connection to the earth itself. So before I could experiment with it, I had to experience it myself. Wouldn't want to have other people doing something I didn't experience and understand to some degree. So I got buried in the earth. And so sure enough, I had that experience. I thought, whoa, we're flying. It was amazing. It was psychedelic, actually. And eventually I got used to the idea that I couldn't move. And even though there was some things crawling around in the earth, anyway, I couldn't move. And as I was there, someone started to talk to me, and I looked over at the person who was at some distance, who was supposed to be silent, and they were looking the opposite way. It wasn't them. And I realized the earth is talking to me. And so now I don't mean that it was like a logical conversation. It's more like the kind of speaking you might hear in a dream. Like I was getting advice for questions that I was carrying about the aim and direction of my life. Without me having to state them, I was getting statements from the earth about how I should deal with that. It was mind-boggling. It was really beautiful. It was meaningful, and it still lives inside me. So that would be an example of a ritual process, a fairly extreme one, that people would do in indigenous people would do in order to connect the person to the heart, to the womb of the earth. And so the kind of when you were talking about the spirit of the earth, to traditional people, that's a living thing that you want to be held by. So you go in there and feel it. And you can get some of that just by laying on the earth and allowing the energy to come. And I'll give another example that's quite different, but in Spain in particular, flamenco, the dancing and the music of flamenco, the spirit of the music comes from the center of the earth. And when the people are doing flamenco dancing, when they're stomping on the earth, they're calling up the spirit at the center of the earth. And the origin of that kind of dance was understood as a direct connection between the vitality at the center of the earth, which keeps all the forests going and all the plants and everything coming directly into a person's body and psyche. And then you're dancing with the earth. And so that's different from being immersed in the earth, but that was another way of doing it. So ancient people had all these ways of having vital, immediate, physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, mythological connections to the earth that we've mostly lost. But they're available because the earth is always trying to send people energy. That's one reason I stand up when I talk.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Gosh. Oh, profound. So this next question, we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction here. As I mentioned initially, this conversation with you is a lead-up event to the 1,000 Goddesses Gathering Global Grid. And the 1,000 Goddesses Gathering Global Grid is it is based on a Tibetan prophecy that when 1,000 goddesses or Tibetan Taras unite, it will shift the tone of our sacred earth from fear to compassion. And I just would love to know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's alliterative also. Goddess, gathering, anyway, a lot of alliteration there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Which is great. I'm intrigued with this idea of the 1,000 goddesses, and maybe what interests me and why I was giving those examples. What I've learned from tribal history and tribal stories and everything is that the earth in its generosity and welcoming nature is always trying to contact us. So in a way, that energy is trying to get into people all the time, is one way to understand that. Now, when it gets into more people, there becomes a greater possibility for a global effect. But I want to say one other thing, because something I'm really intrigued with is prophecy. So in my educational experience, prophecy has always been presented as getting visions of the future. But the word prophecy actually means something closer to stepping into the river of time in such a way as to get messages from the ancient past that are trying to enter the present, as well as visions of the future that are actually become available when you're deep enough in the river of time. So a prophet technically, or I don't know if it's technically, mythologically, a prophet is someone who is actually connecting the ancient past with the present moment and the present moment with the future. And so when I look at it that way, for me, the 1,000 goddesses are busy sending their energy all the time because it's eternal, which means it's ancient, immediate, and part of the future as well. And so that in that way, and I like the idea that there's a grid and maybe there's going to be more availability of that energy, but in a way it's actually available already in the sense of the open present, and in the sense of part of what we're trying to do, I think now in the middle of this rite of passage is connect the ancient with the future to make a fully lived presence, which then will open to all kinds of things that people are not used to seeing, but are actually available parts of the world.
Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you for that. So the topic that we put out for this conversation is the rising of the divine feminine and the divine masculine in balance. And I'm going to bring up another prophecy right now that I heard was shared, came from Ilarion Kurlia, an Inungan or a Aleutian elder who you actually had an interview with through a summit, online summit some years back. You probably remember him. And he is profoundly wise, and he has spoken about the prophecy that we are shifting into a world where the feminine and the masculine will be in balance. And we have historically been swinging over thousands and thousands of years within human culture from patriarchal to matriarchal to patriarchal to matriarchal. It's been a swinging pendulum. But that what the prophecies say within many indigenous cultures is that we are being invited to a new phase. This is where you're talking about we're in the liminal place right now. But the future ahead of us is one of balance. So I'd love your thoughts on that. We haven't really talked too much about the divine masculine. We'll get there in a second. But since we're on the thread of prophecy, I'd love your thoughts on that.
So I'm seeing it a little differently. In other words, I'm not that comfortable with the modern mind, which sees time literally as past, present, and future, because mythologically, all three are present all the time. Like when you enter a story, you usually say once upon a time. Well, there is no upon a time. You could say once behind a time, once below a time, but it means once in a time that wasn't trapped as literal time. Time opens up. When time opens up, the archetypes, the divine essences, all that stuff becomes more available. And that's why people were always telling stories to connect to the unseen. So I would rephrase, I mean, it's just my own way of seeing things. Not so much it's always been out of balance and is going to be in balance. The essential realm, the divine realm, the spiritual realm, always has its own kind of balance. It's us that's out of balance with it. So what I think what we're on the verge of, or what we're being potentially affected by, is creation mythology or creation myths. Because in creation myths, the divine feminine, divine masculine are there in some kind of meaningful, let's say, balanced relationship to begin with. So another way to say that there's going to be balance is going to say we're going to get connected to recreation. So I have a habit of saying creation myths are actually recreation myths, right? The modern logical perspective is creation happened back there and we're in the after effect of it, and eventually it's going to end. But in mythology, that's not how it is. The world is recreating itself all the time, the way a forest does. Most people actually have recreated their lives more than once, and our body recreates all the cells over a 7-year period. We are living in the midst of recreation, and when we realize that, we're closer to the origins, and the origins have a proximity between things that are divided once creation is underway, and that includes the masculine and the feminine. So my imagination as I'm talking is going back to ancient India. And if you go back far enough, you get a deity like Prajapati. Prajapati appears mostly as a masculine deity, but if you go back far enough with Prajapati, Prajapati appears feminine, or appears as another deity called Vak, V-A-K, Vak, Vak. Vak is everything that's in the world is an expression of Vak. Without the feminine energy, the world cannot express itself. And so in the ancient story, it goes back to both the masculine and the feminine, the masculine being the framework, the feminine being the vitality and expression. I find those things really helpful because they create a lot of space for people to explore and try to find themselves in. I'm not sure if that's making sense, but that's kind of where I go. Is so rather than something's going to happen that's going to literally change the future, it's almost as if from an earth mystical point of view, we'd have all that in the present if we open to it. If we open to it, it's here also already.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Would you say then the invitation is to just open up to it, to heal into that? It's already here already.
Yeah. We actually, I mean, creation myths are profound. And by the way, there's uncountable number of creation myths. Most cultures have more than one. Even the Bible has two. So that there's so many ways to imagine creation that if you study enough of them, you see, Sophia creates the whole thing, or in another myth, it's Prajapati, and you start to realize the wonder of the whole thing. And when there's balance, it's a dynamic balance. It's a balance that's on the verge of imbalance, or it's an imbalance on the verge of balance. It's more like dancing than it is like, landscaping or architecturally created. And so the human psyche is prepared for that. We inherit the entire imagination and understanding of humanity. I mean, that's Carl Jung's important work with the idea of the archetypes. So if you think of the archetypes of the feminine and the archetypes of the masculine, if there's balance, it's very dynamic. It's very dynamic because once you have those two, you're probably going to have then, if you have the archetype of the masculine and feminine, pretty soon you can have the archetype of the child. In other words, it's in creation, it's in recreation all the time. And then we have just been educated into a very horizontal, limited sense of the world and the mystery of the world that we've been born into.
Thank you for that. So I'd love for you to talk about the masculine then. You've done so many years of work early on in your life, and I don't certainly know everything that you've done by any means, but part of the dynamic that that's playing out these days, as I frame it, is the call for the healing of the wounded masculine, the rising up of the divine masculine. So I would love your thoughts on that. Like, how do you even define divine masculine?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm more like about stories. So I guess you could say the divine masculine lives in the heart. That's the place for it. And modern world quite fascinated with the brain, which is a fascinating organ, but the ancient world is fascinated with the heart. And the heart was believed to be the place of imagination. And imagination was believed to be the deepest power of the human soul. And so in a way, we're talking about reimagining the masculine, which would be the healing of it as well. So I want to repeat something I said at the beginning. I just love the idea that men have a womb, but it's in their heart. And so if you go back to the idea of rites of passage, the rites of passage for a young man would involve the breaking open of the heart. And as the old Spanish proverb has it, the only heart worth having is a broken heart, because that's the only way things can get in and come out. And so what does that mean, the breaking open of the heart? Well, usually it would mean some kind of intense experiences that break the shell of the family experience and open a person to the immediacy of nature, the spiritual realm, culture. I mean, not culture, but the earth and all that kind of stuff. And that process would involve two things that are really important, I think. One, an awareness of the uniqueness of the individual soul. So I know, in the culture that we're in, we talk often in collective terms. And people will say, what does it mean to be a man? Well, one thing is the only way to be a man is to be a very specific man. In other words, that a person is only fully a man when they are the unique version of themselves. I don't know if that makes sense, but when you're working with young people, it makes a lot of sense. What's trying to be awakened in there may have masculine form and masculine tonality, but it is a unique soul. And if the man doesn't know that, then he's caught in the kind of limited level of dynamics in the society, which is the definitions of gender that don't usually help that much. And then the second thing, so one thing is the cracking open of the heart, which is connected to the awakening to the unique nature of the individual person's soul. And the second thing is the beginning of the healing, which is required. Healing, the word healing means to make whole. That's what it means, to make whole. And everyone comes out of their childhood experience unwhole. I mean, and it's not to blame anybody. It's like if the parents could give the child everything the child needed, the child would never leave home and would remain a child. The setup is that the parents, no matter how much they love their child, and hopefully they do love the child and let the child know, but that's not enough because there's something else. And that something else is this awakening to the unique life trying to live, the story trying to unfold from that child. And so the unfolding then, and part of the growing pains on a psychological level, is the need to heal what's already wounded. And so, unfortunately, in the modern world, what often looks like a grown man is actually a wounded child acting out the role of a grown man. And I'm not going to name names, but some of them get elected to high places. We're being given that as an educational experience. And so I'm back to the idea that in the modern world, we miss this thing that was supposed to happen. In other words, one of the good things in the modern world in psychological study is the amount of knowledge about the growth pattern from infancy to adolescence, that people really know how that works psychologically, physically. There's all kinds of knowledge there. But once you hit adolescence, it doesn't work anymore. It's no longer a simple growth dynamic on a biological level. The next movement from the end of childhood to the beginning of becoming a full person is a leap of faith. It's a psychological, mythological rebirth, which includes the breaking open of the heart and the breaking open of the internal life of a person in order to realize all kinds of things that need to be known, including compassion, empathy, and also including learning how to handle emotions that were usually not handled well by one's parents or one's community. That would be done in the middle of the liminal stage of the rite of passage. And so if you accept the idea that we're all in a collective rite of passage now, we're in a position now to relearn those things that most of us didn't have a full experience of in youth.
Gosh. Part of what you were sharing there speaks to one of your books about the inherent genius in everyone. I would love for you to elaborate on that if you're open to that.
Okay, and I can start that from a point of view of masculine, feminine in the culture. So the only living myth experience in my life in Western culture has to do with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And so the great thing about that is there was a myth alive in the culture, in modern culture. There really was very little of it before that, and was mostly seen as Greek myth a long time ago. Myth is a living thing. And for a while there was some myth living in the culture, which was a good thing. One of the things that wasn't so great it was a masculine tone myth. The hero's journey, typically understood, has masculine tonality, and it has a heroic quality. And it's a great story and a meaningful story. But unfortunately, it got called the monomyth. In other words, it is the only story, which is not true. Creation stories are not heroes' journeys. There's all kinds of stories that are not heroes' journeys at all. And so I was having a problem with the idea that there was a masculine tone to the journey of life. And I was working with young boys and girls, I mean, adolescent, youthful girls and boys. And they were both struggling in a major way, and both requiring healing, requiring all kinds of spiritual, emotional experiences in order to become more whole and have an aim or a purpose in life. And so I started talking about a genius myth, not the hero's journey or the hero's myth, but a genius myth. Genius is an old Latin word that literally means the spirit that's already there. In other words, it means the spirit that's there when each child is born. So we're back to the womb. And the imagination of the womb is that each child comes in with their own spirit, their own story, and their life is really the unfolding of that inner story and the spirit that guides that story. And so when I started talking to young girls and boys about that, did you know that you have a genius nature? They got it right away, no matter where they were coming from, tattooed kids coming from the hood going, whoa, what do you mean? Okay, I got some genius. Okay. And it wasn't that each one is a genius, and everyone has some genius, and the genius is unique. So that if a person doesn't live their inner story out, then that story will never be lived in the world. But if a person can find it, then they have a genius connection. And that means they can be on their unique path, and they can live that story. And so that was my way of getting out of what I thought was limited, overly heroic, and too much masculine tonality that wasn't inviting to girls and women. And so that's how I wound up writing a book called The Genius Myth, which was trying to reintroduce the idea of a genius, an inner mythical spiritual quality that is unique to that person and that can be called on. So the genius, not only the calling in a person's life, is calling to the genius in them. That's one way to understand it. And the genius is like an inner guide that accompanies a person through their life. And so once a person gets a sense of it, you also can hear little words coming and advice coming from the genius, which is going through life with us. And so that's part of the genius myth.
Wow. And I'm certain that these young people that you're working with, or even older people, there's a level of self-esteem that comes in when you go, I have a genius. I have the genius within me. That is me, my inherent unique genius.
Forget it. Forget it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
How empowering for them.
that genius is not a production of the parents. It's a spirit. It was called the spirit that's already there. And so it doesn't require religious belief or anything. It's like an inner spirit in one's life that grows when we find a path of meaning. And so you have young people saying that they're growing up in a very confused social situation with lots of rapid change, and they're inhaling the atmosphere that the world might end at any point. That's the modern, belief system. And that's very depressing to the spirit of life. But then to hear that there's a unique thing in them that already knows what it is and where it's trying to go, and that if they can connect to that and live with that, their life has meaning and purpose that also benefits other people and could even benefit the earth. Somehow they can get it really fast because it's a very old idea that can make a comeback.
Thank you. Thank you for your powerful, powerful, brilliant work. At this point, you know what? I would love to open this up to questions from people who are here with us. So I have to figure out how to change the way my computer's configured here. But if anybody has a question for Michael, are you good with that, Michael? Apparently, Corin
Yeah,
said that you like to entertain questions.
I like
So,
questions. Yeah, yeah, because then I can tell
okay,
who's
great.
present. Yeah.
Right, right. So if somebody has a question, you can either raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat box and then unmute yourself. And or I'll either read your question or you can unmute yourself. So who has a question for Michael at this point? And I can't see everybody because for some reason my computer screen, the way that this shifted. So I suggest actually that you put it in the chat box. So if somebody's raised their hand, I can't see everybody. Does anybody have a question?
The thing about a question usually is what you're questioning usually will be helpful to other people. In other words, people get a little bit self-conscious, but a question that comes from, the center of a person is going to be helpful to other people. That's also why I like to answer them.
Yeah,
Or try.
that's usually true. Everybody gets eliminated by the question and the answer. Okay, so Joshua, you have a question. Would you like to type it in the chat? Or can you unmute yourself and speak? Oh, it looks like well, that's all right, Joshua. I don't know how you say your name. Can I move Moon? We'll get to you next, okay?
Okay, sure.
Okay, we'll get to you next. So go ahead, Joshua.
All right. Thanks very much. I'm really actually found my way here through a person in a person from my community in Melbourne, down here in Australia, and she just had a post. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
She just linked a post about Michael Meade. So I'm actually new to your perspective, but I really appreciate it. It made me think of Marshall McLuhan's concept of acoustic space and visual space, and I feel like the way that you presented all the different aspects of the way you perceive this interplay of feminine and masculine, I felt that it was a very acoustic approach. But I'm also wondering what you would say about the way that you structured that, and maybe say a little bit about the structures that we live with, cultural structures and engineering structures, and the idea that the masculine is the conscious structure of our minds, in some ways, if that rings any bells for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, clearly, you think of all the tall buildings, for instance, and the idea of always building up. You have two things. You have a masculine symbolism, but you also have a ascensionism. And whereas when you get connected to the earth, things are going down. The kiva was below the earth. The caves where people originally learned how to do healing and work with dreams were in the earth. And so we're missing often that quality of descent. And when something goes into a descent in the modern world, it seems as a great loss. They try to keep the stock market up. And when COVID hits and everybody has to retreat, we're really in a descent. And they try to stop those things as soon as possible. But, because in the old cosmologies of the world, fire and water were connected to each other, and they would both rise up, and earth and water were connected and they would descend. And so an old saying is you can only go as far forward as you can reach down or reach back. And so if we are in this middle ground between the loss of one world and the finding of the next one, it involves a descent. It involves going down and getting deeper connected to the earth and to water, which is the fluidity that we need to get through a difficult period. And so those are some thoughts I'm having. There's something else about the sense of masculine dominance. And so if you go into cosmology, often the sun is seen as masculine, and then the feminine is the moon. But in traditional cultures, they imagine the moon as being more powerful than the sun. In modern culture, the sun would be seen as the most powerful. It's there all the time. Every time you see it, it's doing the same thing. Unless it's cloudy, it's shining, it brings light, it grows plants and all that. And the moon is considered a reflection of the sun. But ancient people saw the moon as something that was always changing. It was always in a different phase, and sometimes it disappears altogether, and you have the dark moon, and then it comes back, like life comes back. And so the moon was seen as more dynamic, vital, and more vital than the sun because of its capacity to transform and change. And change was considered the essence of life, not stability. And so, along with many other things, we've lost the sense of lunar knowledge, which is the knowledge of how to transform, how to change, and how to live when everything is changing. So just some thoughts about that dynamic.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joshua, for that question. So, Kenny, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing your name still, probably.
It's okay.
Please
It's
feel
Kenny.
free to, there you are. Yeah, we'd love to hear your question for Michael. Hi.
Hi, it's Kenny Moon, and I just actually had a comment because I thought we didn't have any questions. So excuse me if it's out of place, but I just wanted to share that so I'm an Indigenous priestess. Amira, I'm familiar with your work, and some of the women, the priestesses here in Baltimore, Maryland, introduced me to, well, we came to know you and the work that you did at the Capitol. I mean, the monument.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Beautiful.
so, yeah, we're very happy for the way that you've brought us all together across cultures and traditions, and the honoring that we are all here to do to express ourselves back into our oneness. And that brings me to what I wanted to thank you. Why I wanted to just comment to our guest, because I've been through rituals that have served to connect me deeper to this planet and to my cosmic presence, and my presence beyond time and space. And with that, especially as we're in such a potent time, the downloads have become so strong. And between what I've lived and experienced and what I've read about and the downloads, they are so aligned with everything you're saying tonight. So I just wanted to just share that, to say from around the world, from people who are also a part of the awareness of just the oneness of everything, that it's so right on par. And I just give thanks to you because you talked about individual genius. I used to run a school, and we founded it based on that, the individual genius of our children, because the download then was, that was my small part to help children be reminded, reawakened, just return to their awareness and clear out the blockage that we, and our amnesia cause. And I want to just say you're living in, your divine genius, and it's such good work. So I know you said you're working from the mind more than the heart, but it's so needed because you've translated things that could never make it to the Western mind and construct. So thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. I was actually saying the opposite, that the modern world operates from the brain and the mind, but all the ancient traditions were opening the heart. Yeah. But thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Good. I was going to say, you're definitely not just operating from the mind here. I know you're an intellectual, but thank you.
Yeah, my little bit of a sense of Michael just in this conversation is Michael is very much living from his heart. So we have another question from Karin. Michael, did you find with these young people that just telling them they had a genius within them, that they believe that?
Yes. And so, you know, I can be a stickler about words. So belief is overrated. People really, in the modern world, really get dedicated to what they believe. But knowledge is something else. And so I was not trying to convince young people, but I would not walk up to young people on the street and say, hey, you know, you're a genius. We would be working in a context, and we would be working either in their community and dealing with community issues as well as personal issues, or we would be out in some remote camp somewhere, and we would be doing singing and music and poetry. And in that context, where everybody was getting to see the genius of each other, because you could recognize quickly, you know, someone has a talent for music, someone else has a visual capacity that others don't have, and so on and so forth. Someone has a great amount of empathy that most people don't have, and so on. The genius can take any number of forms. So in that context, where we were honestly dealing with wounds and healing, as well as emotions and ways of connecting in a community sense, to say to a young person, you know that you have genius. Or I would talk to everybody and say everyone has a genius, and then most of them get it right away. Most of them get it right away. There is the idea that each person is a unique individual that will never live again is an essential idea to all traditional cultures. The modern idea is that the person is empty on the inside. If there's a soul, it's a blank soul. And so you have people believing they're blank souls. And so when you mention in the right circumstances that everybody has genius qualities, it's like hearing something you knew and just needed to hear to connect to. So that's what would happen. But then we would be doing music, dance, poetry, the arts, and then people could actually feel and express and see each other's genius. So it didn't require belief. It was really became experiential. It became knowledge. And I'll say one other thing that I've learned about young people. To go back to the heart, there's a flame in the heart. It's one of the old images that you find in many cultures and in many religions. And the flame of the heart grows two ways. The flame is connected, by the way, to the genius. You could call it the genius flame. But anyway, the flame grows when a person realizes that it's in them. When a person has an insight into their own self, the flame of the heart grows. And when it's seen by someone in a meaningful way in the outside, the flame grows. And so most young people are walking around and they may have a pose or an appearance that deflects from the fact that they're trying to be seen for who they are in order that the genius in them and the flame in them can grow. And so if in the right circumstances you say that to someone, and often I would be saying it after I saw their genius, and I would say something about it, and you take a risk when you do that, but often it's right on, and they're waiting to hear that. And that was one of the traditions of all human communities, is that the older people are supposed to be blessing the young ones, and not in some general way, but saying, I bless you for what I see in you. Because everyone needs to have that inner self seen. And when it's seen as genius, it's seen as unique, it's seen as meaningful, it's seen as valuable. And that underscores what we call self-esteem.
Mm. Mm. Thank you, Michael. So we have another question from Deanne. How do you feel about emerging technologies and the idea of transhumanism as a result? I'm a traditional mythologist from Pacifica and a poet, but I'm also fascinated by liminal spaces and futurism, hauntology, etc. What does the future look like to you when it comes to the problem of the soul in the world when, as Campbell used to ask, how do we retain our humanity in the face of the machine?
Yeah. Eisenstein, he's the founder of Pacifica. Einstein had the same idea, that how do you grow soul, sustain soul with technology being a big part of everything. I'm not a big fan. I think the two isolations that stay with young people for a while, because how the young people see the world is indicative of what's problematic in the world. And it's easy for young people to be increasingly alienated and disoriented in the world for two reasons. They don't get a chance to recognize early enough, when it's trying to happen naturally, who they are in their own essence. And they're part of a collective culture which sees everyone as part of a gender group, an age group, a buying group, a voting group. In other words, in the age of collectivism, the individual is what's lost. So that's one loss they have, and a disorientation they experience. The second one is the isolation caused by technology. I mean, increasingly, we are literally leaving young people alone with their devices. I mean, that's really what culture has become. And that's an alienation and an isolation. I say you can recover from it. And I'm not saying that all technology is bad, but I'm saying the way it's being handled adds to the alienation and disorientation of young people. And it adds in general to the alienation at the heart of the culture. So I think that the transformations that we need are not technological. They are psychological, mythological, spiritual. And I don't know how it's going to go. It could be that there's a period of time when more and more experimentation happens with AI and on other technological levels, and then people begin to realize that what we're looking for is not there. The old idea that what everybody's looking for is inside. It's in the technology of the soul. It's in the realm of the spirit. And all excursions into outside life are really pilgrimages to get back to the center of oneself. And you could say technology on a collective level is a pilgrimage in order to eventually turn back to the deep self. That's a thought.
Thank you. Deanne had another question here, and then I'm going to go to David and then Maureen. Deanne's next question is the genius akin to the Greek idea of, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Daimon / Daemon?
Daimon. Yeah. That's the Greek term. The Greek term is the daimon, and genius is a Roman or a Latin term, and so they're very connected. And so one thing I'll say about the daimon. So again, the idea of the daimon in Greek philosophy, psychology, and mythology was a uniqueness in the person, and so one way to think about it is everyone has their daimon. It's like the inner voice that speaks to someone. What people call conscience is really like the voice of the inner spirit, not a system of ethics. But anyway, that's deep conscience. So the daimon is the inner guide. It's also what's considered to be a protecting energy in one's life. In other words, when a person is connected to the genius or the daimon, they're more protected because they're living in what used to be called the gradient. They're living in the plot line that's trying to unfold through them. But in terms of the play on words, when a person denies their daimon, it turns into a demon. In other words, this isn't a matter of choice. Either a person lives their unique spirit, their daimon, their genius, or it turns against them. And so it's interesting. There's no neutral. We're either growing soul and becoming a bigger version of ourselves, or we are shrinking and diminishing or turning into the opposite of ourselves. And so that's complicated, but daimon is the Greek version of genius.
And Deanne just commented, becomes shadow.
Psychologically, the the genius seen as a flame, as a brightness, as the going on of a light, then becomes a deepening of the darkness inside the person. And it's not a choice in a sense. It's a dynamic that gets lived out. Now, the other reason I wanted to talk, especially to young people, about genius or daimon, is because there are so many problems in the world. I mean, there should be no unemployment because every problem you could imagine in nature is happening all at once. And every issue you could imagine in culture is happening all at once. One of the problems I have with the heroes myth is that heroics can't solve all those problems at once. Heroics is contributing to the problems. So the idea of a genius nature different in everyone, with each person having a calling, means that if more people awaken to their genius, people would naturally be going. So that there's a girl, right now in school learning whatever, but not being helped with the idea that in her is a knowledge already of how to work with plants where the earth has become too dry. And there's another one somewhere that doesn't know it yet, but they have a natural gift for how to work with people who are overly anxious. You know what I'm saying? And if all of those geniuses were in operation, people would be doing the healing like the 1,000 goddesses in all kinds of places at once, just like the goddess with the 1,000 arms, with no one having to take on responsibility for the whole thing, and with no need for a new idea or everybody agreeing. Everybody would be doing meaningful work that was secretly connected, and we would be back to the sense of the creation being the ongoing thing that we're invited to join.
Ah, I love your vision. I love this. David, please unmute yourself. You have a question.
Thank you, Michael. So the topic of our session is the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So what does mythology tell us about the divine masculine? What does he look like after the to write a passage?
Well, you see, the divine cannot be collapsed into an individual person. So it's really, how does the divine express itself through the individual? So there's a danger of equating the human with the divine. The mythological sense would be that the divine expresses itself through the human. And they used to say the divine is trying to enter the world all the time and can only do so through the people alive at a given time. And then it does so uniquely through each person. So I'm not good at describing either the divine or the gender thing in a collective way, because when I've really experienced it, it's been unique individual. Now, you can go, Jung's idea of the archetypes is really helpful, because you can then go look at specific archetypal energies that, and then it's interesting too, though, because the archetypes of the feminine can manifest in a man, and the archetypal masculine can manifest in a woman. In other words, the mythological realm, and even to some degree the psychological realm, is not as determined as people like to be in collective culture. You know what I'm saying? Like with a young person, when you get to know a young person, and then they become more awakened to themselves, they become more imbued with a divine energy, because the genius is a spirit. It's divine. It's not human. That's why when a person they realize they're a painter, and they're going to have a show, and the show is tomorrow, and tonight they're up painting 7 new paintings, because the genius has been activated, the spirit is activated, and it doesn't care that your body needs food and sleep. It just wants to go. And so that's more like the dynamic. And then you see the expression of the feminine or the masculine in archetypal form or divine form coming through individuals. I don't know. I'm not good with when, what is a man? A man is a unique expression of the divine in a masculine toned body or something, you know what I mean? And it's interesting too in contemporary culture how trans has become a big issue, especially for the political right. The fear of trans children and the fear, which is evidence of the collapse of the structural notions about gender. So there seems to be either more trans children or more of an issue of trans coming into consciousness, very disturbing to people who want men this way, women that way, you know, and all like 2 bathrooms and that's it. And in the betwixt and between, in the liminal phase, you have an increase of trans, which is a blending or, you know, different arranging of the elements that would normally be separated into gender duality. And so, anyway, I'm not that good at figuring out, you know, except when you see the divine coming through someone, you know, like I was mentioning drumming at the beginning, and when I got involved in drumming, I got drafted into drumming, and I wound up drumming with African tribal musicians. And when you're in that mode and you're drumming, you can see someone being carried by the divine. You can feel that something is happening and it is moving them into a different space. It happens to dancers all the time. And I'm way more intrigued with the uniqueness than I am with the how to frame it. I'm sorry, I'm not that helpful with that, especially right now. I don't know right now. So I love it when you see a person express themselves as themselves. And it can have a mixture of masculine and feminine qualities, and it can have a mixture of human and divine, and it's a beautiful thing. And then it's gone, and you're back to regular experience. So, anyway, thanks for the question and for the patience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Maureen, please unmute yourself. Now you're muted. Now you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks. Wow, this has been a wonderful, fascinating discussion, and I thank you for it. Two things. One, you talked about, you know, the problem with men is heroics and the hero's journey. And since this is in part about the masculine rising and the divine feminine and masculine coming together, I also feel, and I'm an energy healer and seer, and that, you know, women have gotten conscripted into that story too, the heroics, and of course, so the divine feminine has, you know, been sequestered for a long time. So I'm curious, you know, how you've experienced seeing that the difficulty in men descending into opening the heart, and women essentially having to get beneath the emotional wounding into the deeper heart. So that's one thing. And the second thing I just wanted to say, I was really excited about you talking about the genius, because, you know, I've studied with two of the world's greatest and most researched energy healers and clairvoyants, and Barbara Ann Brennan saw that, she called it the core star essence. And she said it's deeper than the energetic structure of the chakras. It's deeper than anything. That she actually saw it as the prime intention of an incoming soul. And I'm talking about the divine spark is because we are also divine. We are not just human. And we have an intention to, as you say, fully express. But this line, this energetic line of getting into the descent, into the earth, trusting that we have a structure that's filling with divine inspiration, that we're connected to beyond terms of God, an actual experience of that light and that love. But along that line, she saw, and I did workshops on this, and it was really, really profound how people could tune into it, that you could be disconnected from the crown and say, well, I lost the whole God thing, or I'm a skeptic, and I don't see myself as part of the cosmic. You could be blocked there. The line could get distorted at the heart, and for plenty, that's true. My heart has been broken, and I don't know the difference between my emotional heart and my spiritual heart. So the line, of your heart is supposed to go straight from cosmos down through your center, all the way down through the womb or hara into man, all the way into the earth. And then you will be fully able to receive what your core star essence came here to unfold as your personal genius. And there were cultures that certainly did acknowledge that genius as he spoke up. But I love the idea that if we don't learn, there's another center called the power center. And if the power center is off, you might have the idea, oh, I am to do this and express this. But you look around and it's not being supported. You don't have the power to actually materialize it into the world. And if your connection, as you talked about, going into the earth and the womb work, and if that's, you're pulling away from that because you feel trapped in the world, because you don't have a sense that you're a cosmic being as well as a human. All of these points become points of distortion, which make it difficult for people to really live their way into this. And I just wanted to share that because I love the idea that it's deeper than an intention. It's not of our parents. It's nothing like that. And so it's often not supported because it's not in somebody else, unless they're so clear to be able to see you with love and say, I see this in you, right? And it's ritualized in this way. And it's exciting because I really feel like there's a lot of that coming in right now, just because of where we are with the light coming into the world, and it's igniting all these places that have been sleeping. So thank you for all the.
Thank you. So, sorry to cut you off, Maureen. I'm just looking at the time. Michael, do you want to respond to Maureen?
So I wrote another book called Fate and Destiny, The Two Agreements of the Soul. And so when I'm talking about the genius and its connection to the divine and a unique spirit, it's encased in the body, but also in the fate, F-A-T-E, the fate that a person has. So destiny, very much like she was just saying, destiny is a star word, destinare, of the stars. So everyone has a star in them. That's why we call people who are very talented stars. We see their star. Most people project theirs onto someone else, but everyone has their own speck of star. But everyone has their own fate. So the two opposite energies are fate, everything that limits a person in life, which can be, nowadays it's seen as DNA, biological issues, but also psychological issues of the family and so on. Every family has its own fate, and a person is born into the middle of a story that's already going on, a family story. And a family is like a kind of generational attempt to solve specific problems. And so everyone has their fate, limits biological, limits psychological, and so on. And then everyone has their inner spirit, speck of star, divine star, inner flame that is connected to their destiny or their destination. And we live within those two. And so and I think this was already being said, I'm just re-saying it. If a person is only connected upward to the sense of spirit, they will be ungrounded and they will not incarnate the life that they are here to live. And if a person is cut off from that spirit, they will be trapped into bodily, instinctual things that don't represent their uniqueness either. And so I tried to write that out in a book about how we're each a descendant or a person wrapped in a fate looking for a destiny. And then one more thing, the twist of fate is what happens when we accept the fate and then the destiny becomes revealed. Most people are running from their fate. But when we say, okay, I'll accept whatever the limitations are that are real limitations in my life, then the spirit has a chance to genuinely grow and we have a chance to awaken. So we're limited, but we are also vessels of spirit and in a sense the divine.
Thank you. Okay, Cameron, you're going to be the last person that we're going to allow a question from because we're kind of running out of time. And then there was a question I'll speak to from Joshua and a supporting comment from Deanne. So Cameron, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask.
Hi, thank you. And Michael, I'm happy to know you're near Seattle. I live in Bellevue, so this is a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
A quick question. So you spoke about the rigidity and the fear of a man must be this, woman must be this, and we see it manifested in many ways in our current world. What might be some helpful responses, especially to our kids? So I've got kids in their 20s who are growing up in this world that is seemingly torn apart and set one off against another, this, not this. What are some helpful responses to that?
Yeah. Really hard to be a parent under these conditions. And so I don't know. I think my fallback position is, well, as a mother, I know it sounds like you have more than one child, maybe. And what happens is you realize each child born is utterly unique from the beginning. Fathers get that too. I have 4 children, and I remember holding each one of them going, oh, I feel this is a different child than the one that was born before, and so on. So the blessing of that uniqueness. And so, yeah, there's lots of questions about masculinity, femininity, but the way it manifests in each child is different anyway. And so to the old idea of blessing, which includes recognizing what's there and saying it, if that can be done, is really valuable. Children need to be truly seen and truly heard. And so I found that as a parent really hard sometimes to listen to the children because I wasn't listened to as a child. It was really, really problematic for me. And even when the children grew up and they come home and say, when we were young, you did this and you didn't do that. And part of the job of the parent is to just accept that when that happens, because it does usually happen. But in the meantime, blessing the children, just blessing them. And I mean, in the unique moment when when the child has had a problem set, they failed at something or it didn't work, but you can bless their uniqueness and the thing that you know about them. I don't know if that helps. I don't think we can create a safe world for them in the sense that they are going to face the fact that we're living with collapsing institutions, including the institutions of gender. We're just living with that. That's part of the liminality. And so my understanding is we fall back on ourselves. And so if the understanding of the self is that it's unique, it's individual, it's secretly connected to the womb of the earth and even to the spiritual realm and also to the divine, that if we can somehow, and you often can't say that to a child directly, but you can say certain things about their deep beauty, about the brilliance that is in them and so on, that they can take in, because that's what's going to be needed. The outside world is not going to solve things for a while. It is really the time of, the the word apocalypse doesn't mean the fiery end of the world. It means collapse, renewal. Collapse, renewal. And so we're all witnesses of the collapse now, but we're all invited to be part of the renewal. And I know this isn't good practical advice, but the child is going to be a witness of the collapse. If they can feel that they could contribute to the renewal, they'll have a better chance in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Thank you, Michael. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. And the question came up here, can we share our emails where there'll be a group chat where I can join on Facebook or Discord or something? The best way for me to answer that, Joshua, is to encourage everyone to get on Michael's, to go to Michael's website, because Michael offers courses on a regular basis. I'm accurate saying that, right, Michael? You're about to start another one this month, I believe.
We're starting, this month. It's the heart within the heart. It's this old idea of the sacred, holy, mystical, mythological heart within the heart, which is, anyway, it's going to be a series on that. But I should mention Living Myth, which is the name of the podcast that we have, is free every week. People can, I think one came out today. One came out called what? Something, can't remember the name. Anyway, the Oracle at the Center, and it's about Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, but also how the Oracle manifests as the deep self in a person. But anyway, there's a free mythologically aimed podcast every week called Living Myth. And so people can find that, and there's lots of them. You can hear all kinds of themes, genius, and all kinds of carryings on.
Carryings on, I love it. A brilliant carryings on. So in the replay email that's going to go to everybody, Michael's website is going to be listed in there. But I was just typing in, but I just want to confirm it's mosaicvoices.org. Is that right?
Yes, that's it. Mosaicvoices.org. Mosaic Voices, all one word, lowercase.
Right. So that will wrap it up for us with this wonderful, wonderful conversation with Michael Meade. This has been such a joy, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this. And the replay email will go out in the next day and a half. And there may be a way to have this interview up on another platform. I'll have to discuss that with Corin and Michael and find out what they're comfortable with. But thank you, everyone, for your questions. This has been very rich, and I've certainly learned a lot. I can speak for myself. So enjoy the rest of your evening, your day, wherever you are in your time zone. And Michael, so much love and gratitude to you for your brilliance, your huge heart, and all of the way you're bringing hope forward in these really interesting liminal times. I'll just word it that way. So, all right, lots of love and hugs to all of you. Take care. Thank you, Douglas.